had to give up driving 5 years ago because of eyesight problems.
It is a lifeline for those who either haven't got a car, can't use their car, or just want to help the environment by choosing not to use their car.
I use it to get to Manchester Airport because I have a daughter who lives in Ireland.
It gives people access to places that they need to get to, so like the shops, banks, into towns, into cities, to stuff that they don't have in the places where they live.
People like us who travel from different countries, they don't have driving license of UK or any other countries, and getting that is quite difficult.
Get us all riding buses happily and frequently and reliably.
There's clearly a want and need for bus services across the Peak District, but that doesn't necessarily translate to good services. Within the local area, there are several groups that have been set up with the sole intention of trying to find out what the problems are and what solutions there may be to them. One of those groups is the Bakewell Bus Users Group, that was set up by Georgina Blair.
There's lots of other bus user groups throughout the Peak District and we're all facing similar things. There's issues about the lack of connectivity between villages, which affect residents being able to take part in community activities. A really big example is that there is no evening service between Buxton and Bakewell. Buxton, which is like a brilliant hub for arts and culture and has festivals and all sorts of things going on, but you cannot get back there after an evening event to Bakewell. You live in one of the villages near Bakewell and there isn't a bus service that will take you up to Castleton or Hassasage or Hope or Edale or any of those early enough to go for a walk that starts in the morning, because on the weekends those services, on a Saturday they start later. There is no Sunday bus service for some of those services, and that means that visitors have to use cars, they face trouble with parking, they irritate residents by parking in places, and then they also impede bus services because buses can't get through. We offered better public services for both visitors and residents. We would all be happier, it would be better for the environment, we'd have a better experience.
I was also keen to learn about what goes into running a bus service, and thankfully 2 employees of Hulleys of Baslow, one of Derbyshire Dales's most widespread bus companies, were happy to share.
People don't seem to like to use the buses because they quite often come across as sort of a last resort to people. But if more people use the bus, then the more revenue the company earns and the better buses they can get, which will just overall improve the journey for the passenger. But for that to happen, they've got to get money somehow.
It is a combination of funding and logistical issues. So the main funding we get is from the council, which will pay so much per day for a bus to run. Then there's another kind of funding called BSIP, which is Bus Service Improvement Plan. And the idea of BSIP funding was to get a bus service back to a level where on-bus revenue is enough to sustain the bus service. But I think BSIP was used to prop up a lot of dead duck bus routes. But if they were never at that level before COVID, it's unlikely, even with funding, you're going to be able to bring the revenue up so it can sustain itself. So I think in that sense, if the funding was possibly allocated a bit more cleverly, we'd be able to see more out here and possibly less town service. Now, town services are still important, but still things like a taxi would be cheaper in town. Out here and in the villages we serve, some are getting a bus every 2 hours, and I know in other regions it could only be 2 buses a day. We basically want as fewer buses out to bring as much money in. A route like the 172, for example, that takes an hour and 10 minutes end to end. And it's a funny frequency to have, but if you have it at that, it's 1 bus during the day and then 2 at school times. If a bus breaks down, because the roads out here aren't as good as the bus's suspension, it shakes the hills, more stress on the engine. It leads to more breakdowns, and they're also harder to deal with because the location of the bus is in, the driver might not have any signal and all sorts.
But what you really want to know is, how do these problems affect the people that actually use the buses?
At times when it's only 1 an hour, and that's true too of places like Chesterfield, if you don't get one, then you're not going to get your train. And when you have an advance ticket for the best fare, you've missed the chance to use it and have to pay an on-the-day fare, which is extremely expensive.
We have had quite a lot of difficulties with the buses that go through our village because they are less frequent now, post-COVID. They were very, very irregular and completely unpredictable. I have to say they have improved finally, but they're not very often. If I miss the bus I'm about to catch, I will have to wait nearly 3 hours for the next one.
Faced a lot of problems recently. So when it snows, buses are cancelled. I work 6 days a week, but there is an issue and I have to always do a call on work that I cannot be here, my bus is cancelled or my bus is late. And yeah, timings are very terrible. And even the drivers are rude, and sometimes the stops, so it should be on each and every bus stand. Sometimes they are late, so they skip the bus stands and they just pass by over there. And so that's an issue as well.
The Bakewell Bus User Group is well recognised by the council, having been involved in meetings and even receiving visits from the Mayor of Bakewell herself.
I've come to this meeting really on a reconnaissance trip to find out what is actually happening about the buses and various updates. I have been to meetings before, but I gather there's been quite a lot of progress, and other parties, other mayors indeed, the Mayor of the East Midlands is working together with this group to improve the service of the buses. I tend to use my car. However, I was just discussing with Sue to get to Chesterfield Calo Hospital when I had damaged my hand, and I could not get a bus at the time because they weren't in existence. But now I'm happy to hear that that service is not just up and running, but has been running for some time. And this is a great facility. Bearing in mind, a taxi from here to Calo is £35, so it's no small thing.
Okay, so now things are going to get a little bit more complicated. You see, here in the Derbyshire Peak District, we don't have just one bus company that services all of our routes. Instead, we had 4, and now we have 7. You see, unfortunately, after over 100 years of serving the local community, Hulleys of Baslow went bust, and it happened rather suddenly. And that meant there were a lot of bus routes that needed to be filled. But bus routes are expensive, and so there were no companies that wanted to take all of them on. Thankfully, the council do fund some routes, and so they got together and managed to get enough bus companies together to service every single route. And I spoke to one councillor to find out more about that.
In some ways, it's a very tragic story. Hulleys of Baslow have been operating buses in this part of the Peak District, South Yorkshire, for well over 100 years, and very recently they went out of business. You can imagine the impact on our local communities who woke up one day and went down to the bus stop and found the bus they used to catching was no longer coming. Fortunately, myself and fellow councillors, our local MP, John Whitby MP, and most importantly, members of the public, were very vocal in making it known to Derbyshire County Council and others that we really depended on these bus services. And to their credit, the County Council stepped up to the plate, and working with partners, were able to bring 3 other bus operators into play very quickly. So we've been able to retain, I think, all the routes that Hulleys operated.
The services may be running again, but that doesn't mean the system is perfect. The fact an entire bus company could go bust shows that there are definite flaws. The solution, however, is complicated in that there isn't really an exact solution yet. The one that's most talked about is public ownership. This is what Better Buses East Midlands are campaigning for. Public ownership would take all the bus routes in the East Midlands and put them in control of the local government, in this case the East Midlands Combined Authority. And then, in theory, the city services that are busier would be able to fund the quieter rural services. But that is all down to funding. You see, this is the system they have in Manchester with the B network. and Manchester Combined Authority has a bus budget of over £66 million, which is £26 million more than the East Midlands. So whilst we try and figure out how that could work or what other options there are, what are some smaller things that bus companies themselves can do to try and make themselves more profitable or at least more appealing to other people?
The other problem we've got, it's very seasonal, some of the routes we do. So like the Sheffield to Lady Bower and Sheffield to Castleton routes, during summer you can have a fully seated double-decker. But then during the winter, some days you might as well have a car on it. It's so hard getting the balance right. Now, I've done lots of network maps to try and match things up better, and it seems fairly optimal what we are running, or what we can do with the money that comes in anyway. If the buses could get the funding to be a bit more frequent, that naturally sees more people using it, because one thing I found about when I had a car, I had freedom. I could go what I want, do what I want at any time. Whereas with the bus, it's dictating your day to you. But then, especially on a commercial route, we need to basically see the passenger figures go up to another full bus load of bus for that to be then sustainable. Whereas for the more rural routes the council pay for, they'd have to put the funding into that, which the funding could be better, really. Yeah, sadly, it's all to do with money.
It has to be reliable. That's the main thing. If a bus service isn't reliable, then people don't trust it. They'll get taxis instead. They'll try to get lifts and cars. I think the way a company comes across is very important. If a bus turns up battered and horrendous looking, people don't look at it as a professional company. If a shiny new bus turns up with a smart looking driver, friendly driver, if the timetables are good, there's so many things that need to go into sort of making a bus company a good company.
Overall, it's safe to say that our bus services are complicated, but there are a couple of simple things you could do. The first and simplest of all is use them. Whether you live in the Peak District or you're visiting, taking the bus every once in a while will help improve the services, as it will both fund them and tell people where they're wanted and needed. If you want to take this a step further though, the best thing you could do is contact somebody. You could contact a local councillor or contact the MP. Here in the Derbyshire Dales, that's John Whitby. Perhaps you might even go to the Mayor of the East Midlands, Claire Ward herself. You could, however, also speak to a bus users group. In the Peak District, the best you could go to are the Bakewell bus users and the Matlock bus users. They've been collecting information about people's experiences on the buses and are sharing them with the council themselves. Basically, we just want our bus services to be taken seriously and improved to the point where every single person can access the Peak District, whether they live in it or they're visiting.